Welcome back to the Flecks of Gold podcast. I am on a walk. Wanted to talk about the eternal perspective. I think it's really easy to remember that, or to forget that there's an eternal perspective with literally everything. I think of difficult times in my life. I actually recently started the book Surround Yourself with Greatness by Chad Lewis, and the book immediately starts with when his dad was about to die. And all of a sudden, everything is swallowed up in that moment. Nobody's job is important. Anything is important except this dad needs to stay alive and he has a brain aneurysm. And the chances are low that he is going to survive. And so everything just kind of comes into full perspective, right? I think these moments teach us a whole lot about ourselves. Like right now I'm walking. I could run for a couple miles this second. Drop this phone, I could run a couple miles probably in a decent time. That's health. That is wealth. That is precious. Regardless of anything else, that's precious. I need to be strong right now, regardless of what's happening or not happening in my life, because there's an eternal perspective. I need to be strong so I can be strong for my future kids. So when my future kids are not wanting to do something, hopefully I can be an example of dad ran a marathon, or dad started this business, or dad trusted God and still tried this out and it worked out. So we can do the same thing. I mean, it's like Nephi with the brass plates. It's our dad followed the commandment to leave Jerusalem, and we have all been given the specific commandment to go and get the breastplate. So how about we do that? And so they totally just went for that. And of course the blessings were eternal and magnificent and couldn't be doubted, They were so clear. It provided direction for their families and help and, just kind of reassurance. I mean, for me, books have been a big source of solace, and it's worth going to the bookstore or DI or something to get some books. For them, it was a little more difficult. They had to literally risk their lives. We don't do that. That just isn't how it is anymore, really. But, I was just thinking about how, Jacob 4:13 says it really well. The Spirit tells us of things as they are and as they really will be, and these things are manifested unto us plainly for the salvation of our souls. Regardless of whether you accept it or not, there are moments that the Spirit's trying to tell you things, and it's because of what's going to happen and what is happening right now. And so you can recognize there's an unfolding miracle in your life, even if it's taking time. I saw this at BYU Idaho when right after getting to school, this is 2018, I should start my schooling off at a good start. So open up my scriptures with dinner, Jacob 4:13. The Spirit speaks of things as they are and as they really will be. And I was like, holy cow. Okay, I'm going to follow a prompting. I followed a lot of promptings that night. One led to me meeting one of my best friends. And 4 years later, we're still really good friends. And if I hadn't met him, it's just the Spirit kept me interested in knowing that this was something worth investing in. And it's been a really big blessing, both for me and for him. And so don't doubt the eternal perspective. There's been moments where I recently have been really beating myself up about not having a job or whatever. But then I'm reminded of the eternal perspective. This is such a small moment in time. It's almost unfathomable how small this moment is, and yet it is so important. Because right now I'm making this podcast off of my phone, which, it'd be nice to have my own giant recording studio, but that's just not the thing. And God doesn't really care. He just wants me in the eternal perspective. He wants you. He wants me. That's really all he wants in the eternal perspective, right? So Jacob 4:13 is so bonkers, so good. And then there's a scripture in Alma 39, I think it's 16. It just says, you marvel how these things should be known so long beforehand. I say unto you, is not a soul as precious right now as it will be at the time of his coming? And is it not as necessary for the preaching of the word to happen, blah, 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 as it is right now? Like, isn't it just as important that you should have hope and reassurance as when the blessing is literally staring at you in the face? I remember praying for years to go on a mission, for help, for guidance, for support, for strength, for anything, to help me get there. And then all of a sudden, here I am teaching by the Spirit with an investigator, somebody interested in learning about the church. And it's amazing. It's like, holy cow, that, I prayed for this moment. And Ether 12:19 just says like how, there was so many that saw with their eyes the things which they had beheld with an eye of faith, and they were glad. That's faith. I mean, that's the eternal perspective, is like, in the eternal perspective, this will happen. And right now I'm going to exercise faith. Romans 8:25 is, if we hope for that which we see not, then do we have patience wait for it. It's interesting because I remember 10 years old, appendicitis, my appendix burst. It all happened so fast, kind of similar to Chad Lewis's dad. I mean, I was having a normal day and I had 2 chimichangas, which was probably not the best for my stomach. And all of a sudden it hurt. And I went to get a normal checkup and my mom's on the phone's like, I don't want to get him an ambulance. He doesn't need an ambulance. I can take him there. And all of a sudden I'm like, holy cow, now I'm getting surgery and there's a chance I could die. 10% chance. I mean, if the technology wasn't as good, if I was born in like the 50s, Bob Saget's brother died from an appendicitis. There's no telling if I would actually be making this podcast if health wasn't good enough. I mean, I think God would have kept me alive, but I don't know. There's other things outside of my control, and life is literally so precious. And I did almost die. But I remember one of those nights, laying there by myself, 10 years old, and just thinking like, God, I've lived a pretty good life. If you want, you can take me home. Like, that's okay, but that did not happen. There was an eternal perspective. There was other lives that needed to be touched. There was other things that I needed to see, other things I needed to learn, other things I needed to know, And so there was this eternal perspective.